Richard Thornton pointed his finger at Kesha's 2-year-old son, who had been quietly playing on the kitchen floor, and said coldly, "This is not a daycare center. This is my home, and I will not tolerate you turning my workplace into a playground for this boy." The contempt in his voice made Kesha's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral, knowing at 28 that showing anger to a rich white man like him would only make things worse. Devin continued playing with plastic pots, oblivious to the venom directed at him, while Kesha explained, "It was an emergency, Mr. Thornton. My nanny got sick and I had no one else to leave Devin with. It won't happen again." Richard adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt and sneered, "It better not, because if it does, you're fired. There are dozens of women like you waiting for an opportunity to work in a house like this. Women who understand boundaries." The words echoed in her mind as he returned to his mahogany and crystal office, while she crouched beside Devin and whispered, "Mommy will fix this, sweetheart, I promise." What Richard didn't know was that Kesha Washington had a degree in business administration and 5 years of auditing experience before becoming a single mother abandoned by Devin's father. And he certainly didn't know that for 6 months, she had been documenting every racist remark, every degrading comment, and every act of discrimination inside his mansion. Later, as she cleaned the master bathroom, Kesha allowed herself the smallest smile, because Richard Thornton thought he knew women like her, but he was about to learn he had never met anyone like Kesha Washington. In the days that followed, their conflict became a silent psychological battle, with Richard summoning her to berate her over imperceptible stains, reminding her that his leather chairs cost more than her annual salary, and disguising insults about her being a single black mother as family situation. At dinners with wealthy clients, Kesha overheard him sneer about how difficult it was to find committed domestic help, while guests laughed knowingly, and each time she served wine without reaction, she mentally added the conversation to her growing archive of evidence. What finally broke her patience was when Richard hosted a crucial meeting with a Japanese investor interested in his real estate ventures, setting the stage for Kesha's carefully calculated revenge. During lunch, Kesha served with her usual quiet efficiency, while Richard apologized to the Japanese investor for the delay, then sneered, "You know how hard it is to find competent maids when you're forced to hire from certain communities, diversity issues, government regulations. Sometimes we have to accept lower standards." Speaking as if Kesha were invisible and incapable of understanding the fluent English she had mastered in college. The investor shifted uncomfortably, but Richard went on, "Fortunately, she's well-trained and knows her place." And in that instant something shifted forever inside Kesha. This was no longer just about her job or supporting Devin. It was about dignity and justice for all women like her. That night, after putting Devin to bed, she opened her old laptop, the same one she had used as a financial analyst before her career collapsed after reporting fraud, and began researching Thornton properties. Within hours, she uncovered millions in missing housing funds, rigged bids, and shady political donations, proof that Richard was not just a racist elitist, but a white-collar criminal. For 3 weeks, she maintained her routine, working by day and investigating by night, discreetly recording his racist rants and corrupt dealings with a device hidden in her apron. When Richard's sister Victoria visited, her contempt matched his, saying, "Do you really need to keep that maid? People like her always bring problems." Richard laughed, agreeing it might be time for a change, unaware that Kesha was archiving every word like she once archived multi-million-dollar fraud. Each insult only steeled her resolve, fueled by the technical knowledge he could never imagine she possessed. By August, Richard escalated, humiliating her in front of clients, saying, "Kesha here gets an A in obedience, but you know how it is. Natural limitations of educational background. That's why our housing projects work so well. We know exactly the target audience." She poured coffee silently while her recorder captured every venomous word, adding to her growing evidence. That night, she shared the transcript with David Chun, her former supervisor at Morrison and Associates, who reviewed her files in shock. "Kesha, do you know how many laws this man just broke? Discrimination, hostile workplace, civil rights violations. This is prison time." She calmly showed him photos she'd taken of Thornton contracts, $5 million paid for 200 affordable housing units, but only 80 ever built. David whistled. That's federal embezzlement. Enough to bury him. Kesha nodded. I know exactly what I have. The question is, how do we use it so he can never hurt anyone again? From then on, she lived a double life, maid by day, whistleblower by night, while Richard mistook her silence for submission, unaware that the woman he tried to break was preparing the evidence that would break him instead. On a particularly cruel Friday, Richard decided to test Kesha's limits and called from the top of the marble staircase while she was cleaning the hall, telling her she needed to understand something important about hierarchy. He warned her about other maids who were demanding better wages and conditions and made sure she wasn't being influenced by such dangerous ideas, to which she replied, "No, sir, I know exactly where I stand." A response that satisfied Richard, but carried a different gleam of promise in Kesha's eyes, one he misread as submission. That night, she called the federal prosecutor's office and spoke with Janet Williams, calmly introducing herself as Kesha Washington and revealing that she had evidence of federal fraud in housing contracts, explaining that the man behind it was holding a meeting with federal investors on Monday morning. When asked what she proposed, she boldly said, "Let's give Mr. Richard Thornton the kind of meeting he never expected." Over the weekend, Kesha arranged a nanny for Devon, reviewed every document and recording, and coordinated secretly with prosecutors, auditors, and journalists, preparing to turn Richard's carefully staged business event into his downfall. On Monday morning, as Richard smugly prepared in his Armani suit, rehearsing his lies about another $50 million contract, Kesha arrived punctually, hiding her true role under the disguise of routine service, while Richard dismissed her with instructions to serve coffee properly before the meeting. At 9:40, federal investors arrived: Thomas Bradley from the Housing Department, Director Peterson from Urban Development, and a tall black man who introduced himself as Consultant Washington from the Justice Department, greeting Richard with polite smiles that concealed their real intentions. As Richard launched confidently into his presentation about Thornton Properties' exceptional track record, Consultant Washington immediately questioned the discrepancy between $5 million paid for 200 housing units and the 80 actually built, to which Richard gave a smooth excuse about technical adjustments. At that moment, Kesha stepped forward quietly and placed a thick folder on the table, saying she had brought additional documents for review. To Richard's shock, the consultant opened the folder to reveal damning evidence: internal emails detailing profit schemes, spreadsheets showing stolen millions spent on his mansion, cars, and vacations. As Richard paled and demanded to know how this was obtained, Bradley coldly reintroduced their colleague as federal prosecutor Marcus Washington and revealed that the maid serving coffee was in fact senior analyst Kesha Washington, lead consultant on the housing fraud investigation. In that instant, Richard's world collapsed as he stared at the woman he had mocked and humiliated. Realizing too late who she really was, Kesha calmly removed her apron to reveal a blazer underneath and, with icy composure, asked if he was surprised or if she should simply call him Richard since they had spent so much time together, while Peterson instructed him to sit back down and reminded him he had the right to remain silent, leaving Richard flailing in desperation, trying to insist it was all a misunderstanding as the trap fully closed around him. "Kesha, whoever you really are, we can work this out," Richard begged, insisting he had always respected her. But Kesha laughed for the first time in 3 years inside that house, mocking his claim of respect before pulling out her phone and playing a recording in which Richard's own voice spat racist contempt about people never appreciating real opportunities, one of 23 similar recordings that exposed his systematic prejudice. Bradley whispered in disbelief. Marcus looked grim, and Richard stammered about context until Kesha laid another document on the table, asking what context could possibly justify telling his sister that people like her always needed to be put in their place. Desperate, Richard pleaded for an agreement, but Kesha cut him off with a reminder of the Green Valley families he cheated, people forced to live in shacks without heating or safety while he pocketed millions. And at that moment, Marcus placed handcuffs on the table and calmly informed Richard Thornton that he was under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, discrimination, and civil rights violations. Richard shouted that his family had ruled the city for generations, but Kesha quietly replied that she knew exactly who he was, which was why she had documented every crime and every insult for 3 years, because men like him believed they were untouchable. In panic, Richard tried to weaponize her son, warning that no one would hire her again if she destroyed him, but Kesha smiled with genuine triumph, revealing that her real career was just beginning, that she had just been promoted to director of the federal department's Housing Investigations Division, and that her first official act would be to return every stolen penny to the communities he had exploited. Richard paled as she revealed she had never truly been his maid, but an analyst infiltrating his scheme, turning every humiliation into evidence for the strongest housing corruption case in a decade. Marcus snapped the cuffs on him, taunting that he doubted Richard would stay silent after 3 years of endless racist rants, and as Richard looked in horror between them, Kesha confirmed she and Marcus were siblings who had reviewed his recordings over family dinners. Dragged away in handcuffs, Richard screamed about conspiracies and traps, but Kesha simply watched from the window as the federal car carried him away, knowing that after 3 years of degradation, justice had finally begun. 3 months later, headlines stun the nation. Former cleaning lady becomes federal director responsible for recovering $50 million in stolen housing funds. Walking confidently through the corridors of the housing department in a navy blue blazer, Kesha Washington carried a report proving that Richard's schemes had harmed more than 2,000 families across 5 states, and when she handed it to federal auditor James Morrison, who admitted Richard had deceived him for years, she explained that the evidence revealed something far bigger than Thornton Properties. It was a vast network of businessmen exploiting public housing programs, and when Morrison asked how many had been indicted so far, she smiled, because this was only the beginning. Kesha entered her new office, where a photo of Devin at his kindergarten graduation sat proudly on her desk, and when asked about the results, she replied that 1 businessman, 3 politicians, and 2 judges had been indicted. Her recordings had unraveled a 20-year conspiracy. Across town, Richard Thornton sat slumped on the cold bench of a minimum security federal penitentiary, where he would serve 12 years, his assets seized, his company bankrupt, and his sister Victoria divorcing her senator husband to salvage her own career. When a guard called Thornton visitor, Richard dragged himself into the visiting room expecting a lawyer, only to find David Chun waiting with a newspaper that showed Kesha receiving a Medal of Merit from the Secretary of Housing. David explained that she had recovered $47 million he had stolen, money now used to build real homes and fund a scholarship program for disadvantaged youth, who would study business and law at the newly named Richard Thornton University of Social Justice, a final humiliation that turned his legacy into a beacon for the very people he despised. Meanwhile, at the inauguration of the first housing complex built with the recovered funds, Kesha held Devin, now 3, as hundreds of grateful families applauded her arrival. When Devin asked if his mommy was a hero, she smiled and said, "Mommy just did what was right," teaching him that patience and intelligence were the sharpest weapons for justice. Margaret Thompson, a mother once displaced by Richard's fraud, embraced her with tears of gratitude for finally giving her children a safe home, while Rosa Martinez, who had lost her life savings, clutched the keys to her new house and whispered to her daughter that God had sent them a warrior. 6 months later, universities across the nation studied Kesha's strategy of quiet endurance, meticulous evidence gathering, and legal precision as a model for confronting systemic injustice, while Richard realized that the harshest prison was not the cell but the knowledge that the woman he had mocked had built a legacy of justice upon his ruins. His last desperate letter to Kesha came back unopened, for some people simply didn't deserve second chances after using their first to inflict suffering. Devin, now thriving in a private school funded by his mother's new salary, carried the pride of a hero's son and the unshakable lesson that intelligence and determination always conquer arrogance and prejudice, and as he grew, Kesha's story stood as proof that the best revenge is success beyond an enemy's imagination, and when the world tries to belittle you for your color, your origin, or your status, remember, they may control the present, but you control the future.